Hello everyone, my name is Sidam Kumar Jha and this is another revision video covering the course English for Communication which is provided by the Department of HSS, IIT Kharagpur. So in this video, we'll be discussing about three major prompts which were given to us for the end semester examination. The motive behind giving such prompts is to make the writers engage with the topic in the maximum way possible. The second major thing which they intended to evaluate us was about the fact that with what ease are we able to express ourselves within the given word limit. So we had a word limit of about 200 to 300 words, and we had a subjective question which was needed to be tackled within those words. Any extra words above like acceptable criterion, that is plus minus 10 to 20%, would attract a negative penalty. So in that case, we have to be very clear about what we're trying to write. And since plagiarism is strictly frowned upon, we have to be original in the way we are writing. So in this video, we'll be discussing three major prompts and see what were the points which were discussed upon in the class itself, so that at least we are able to get that on which lines we have to think, so that we are better off in engaging with any other prompt which we see when we sit in the examination. So the first prompt was about communication, visual or verbal. So first of all, let us know what the communication is. Communication is not just unilateral saying something, unilaterally saying something, or unilaterally hearing something. It is a process wherein you are listening to the other person first, and you are responding to it in the apt way and in the most succinct and clarified way possible, so that you are able to convey the exact meaning and there is no scope of doubt left into the minds of the listeners whatsoever. So that is what we mean by communication. One of the major questions which came during the sort of discussion was that what did we use to communicate our ideas before scripts came into picture? So there are two bifurcations to this question. One is the verbal aspect, one is the visual aspect. In the verbal aspect, we used speech as the medium of communication, and in the visual aspect, there were many things which included painting, signs, clips, etc. So since we knew that speech and these paintings and signs were there before we started writing, these are also referred to as the prehistoric modes of communication. The next important thing which we discussed after discussing this question was about whether modern day writing can be distinguished a lot from the ancient communication practices. The answer is no. The modern day writing practices are in fact a much of a derivative from these ancient communicative practices, and hence they cannot be divorced. Let us understand how is this true. Understand the fact that when we try to speak something, when we try to visualize something, we are trying to convey a message to the person who is listening or who is reading or seeing that particular part. So while we write in modern day, we exactly try to develop those scenarios in our writing which make the author or reader visualize about the circumstances the text mentions. For example, in novel writing, in story writing, or even in incidents of report writing, we try to make the text as illustrative as possible with our own words, so that the viewer can, so that the difference between a viewer and a reader is dissolved as much as possible. So there were many things to discuss under the ambit of this topic. A few of them I'll mention. The others you can think of. The first of all was calligraphy. Like calligraphy is a stylized way of writing wherein we use beautiful ways of writing to write the very same thing. Understand the fact when you have same piece of literature which is written in something which is very stylized versus the same text which is written in a font which, let's say, is present in a dictionary, you're much more likelier to read it, you're much more likelier to see it, you're much more likelier to understand it when it's written in a stylized form. And why do we even look at it in first place? Because it's visually appealing, and whenever we read some quotation or something like that, we are much better off at visualizing the prospects of what that plot has to offer. Thereby, at times, we are able to literally listen to the words which are being read by us at the same point of time in our own voice. So that's the beauty of modern day writing. That's the beauty which calligraphy brings to the table. In the second way, we have seen that in the recent times there have been emphasis upon writing which is visually enticing, which makes us think, which makes us ponder about questions which are quite relevant to our current scenario. So in these situations, we are actually thinking of things which are happening around our scenario and relating that particular incident to the writing which we have in front of our eyes. So in that way, we are trying to visualize things. So here there was suggestive reading, which is A.G. Gardner's essay on letter writing, where there were many things written about letter writing as an art which had transcended from medieval times, and in the modern era, it has almost lost its significance in the age of emails and other forms of personal communications as well. But in this essay by A.G. Gardner, we can clearly understand the nuances which he is trying to convey so that these redundant forms of communication even compete with any other form of communication have we have we focused had we focused on these particular things to mention in this essay. So understand this fact that the summary and the crux of this essay is that any piece of literature, for example, letter writing in this particular aspect, should be written in the lightest and the most casual way possible. It does not mean that you should write a formal letter in a way that you will write to your particular friend or your parents. It does only mean that whenever you write a particular thing, you don't have to stress out too much upon what you're writing or are you sounding correct. You just have to maintain the rational flow so that the other person who is reading can actually know that you are not a bot. You are a person who has feeling. You're a person who is able to give a humanly touch to that particular piece of text, and it leaves a good impression on the people who are reading it. Now, the major problem which the author of this essay identified was to condense the atmosphere in which these people live in to concrete words. That is, everyone has self-expression. Everyone can feel the same thing, but not everyone can express the same thing with same intensity, with same diction into words, into essays, into different forms of literature. And that is the beauty of literature itself. Although it is accessible to all, not everyone can master it without giving it its due respect and time. So the major reason behind all this fuss is that people do not express themselves in words as fluently as they would have expressed had feelings been a medium of communication as well. So these are the major problems and lines which are mentioned in this essay, and I hope that you give it a reading because many a times a different perspective is needed to substantiate an opinion, to give a better view on a particular perspective, or to unlearn and learn a new perspective about the same thing. So next, we'll be talking about the distinctions between verbal and visual speech. So next, we'll be discussing about the differences between verbal and visual speech. So when do we use visual speech and when do we use verbal speech? Are they different essentially or not? We'll look into this as a concluding remark to this whole prompt. So understand this that we do prefer visual mode of communication over verbal mode of communication and vice versa at certain period of time. A major and a crude distinction between both of them is that while we talk about visual mode of communication, we usually try to define structural relationships or relationships of logic and inference why we refer to that particular form of communication. While we're viewing a verbal form of communication, we see that this form of communication is most probably used when we're talking about abstract things. Let's say, for example, you're walking down a street and you are asking for a person, hey, where can I find, let's say, Domino's Pizza or an outlet, particular outlet. So what will be the best form of communication? That that person gives you the map and say, look, you find it here and find your location and go to your next destination. Or the person just simply replies that take the second left, move straight, take the right to the dead end, and then you reach your destination. Obviously, the fact that you are able to listen to the directions which is given by the pedestrian will be more helpful to you in this situation. That means that verbal scenarios are much better in these cases over visual scenarios. Now understand the fact that since in a map there are many things written on it, therefore our eyes have to focus on many different things and process whether this is the thing which we want to look at it or not, makes it a more cumbersome task for us. In an alternative view, let's understand the fact that let's say there's a scenery in front of our eyes, and then we try to record the audio clip and then send it to a friend of ours, and let's say ask him to decide and say for once that what is the kind of scenery it is. So let's say the person hears the chopping of the bird, the rattling of the leaf under the foot of the pedestrian and all. But the thing is that there can be variety, there can be variation in what the description is. So you're not exactly communicating in this aspect. But when you take your friend to that particular spot and when the friend sees the particular spot from his own eyes, the variation will be much less. And in these particular situations where structured relationship orders are much more evident, we prefer visual form of communication. Hence, this is the reason why at times we prefer visual form of communication over verbal form of communication and vice versa. Now, there are certain words called didactic words like this, that, those, which are used to point out things or signal things in general. Note that these words are the things where you cannot separate or diverse visual and verbal form of aspect. Therefore, it is leading us to a new concept known as visual verbal communication. This new aspect can be understood in a much easier way. Let's say I say that glass is half full. So when I say the word that, we're automatically prompted to look in the direction of what that means in the sentence. In short, in a nutshell, you want to know which glass I'm talking of, and the most easiest of those way would be to look at that particular glass I'm pointing to while I say the word that, and then listen to my instruction which I'm saying is, in this case, which was that this glass is half full. So in this sentence, when I use the word that, you preferred the visual mode of communication, but for the rest part of sentence, you preferred the verbal part of communication. So this is the beauty of visual verbal communication, and I hope I was able to get this clear in the very first attempt itself. So the second prompt is a prompt which we can very much relate to ourselves. It is pandemic friendship and communication. Like how are these three intertwined, and much has how much effect has pandemic how much effect pandemic has on friendship and communication. So first prompt was about how has it impacted our communication skills. So as we know that in an online semester where we are not engaging much with human beings, since the infection spreading risks are much higher in case of a pandemic, the reading and writing form of communication have taken precedence over seeing and listening form of precedence. So these two skills of reading and writing have taken precedence over seeing and listening just for the fact that we are not able to have much more human interaction in this case. The second most obvious consequence of pandemic is that there are decline in friendship, especially in the especially when we have to work from home, where we cannot have colleagues And even in schools and colleges where we're not able to actually interact with friends on a physical level, have different together or play games in a games period, we're not developing friendships as such. And the very fact that the essential non-essential relationships, that is friendships, are the ones which are being tattered through during this time of pandemic. We are getting away with those relations which we cannot keep in mode of pandemic. The sole reason why, because we are not able to move out of those essential relationships which we have. Let's say we cannot move away from our parents, we cannot move away from our siblings. Since we are surrounded by them 24 by 7, we tend to cut off other people who are not essential, which in this case uh, is, is a friend of yours. So in this particular case, we are cutting that person off for the very same reason as any person would cut, just because he's too busy or too preoccupied with whatever is happening to that person. Now, what is a major problem in this particular scenario? Since we're having mass communication, we are much less reliant on face communication itself. That is, the tone and the expression have gone out of picture, and what we contemplate of a particular thing is text messages and emojis or memes itself. We have to understand the fact that misunderstandings have increased over time because of the very same reason that we are not able to hear the intonation of the words, in the intent behind the speaker, meaning which could be like interpreted in some ways by seeing the expression. And since we are having less contact, that means that we are growing more suspicious of that person since there is less interaction among us. So it is very obvious that we are having less trust among us. Due to this reason, we are getting more defensive to protect our own interest in this online semester. And this cycle actually repeats itself. In the end, in a nutshell, we tend to distance ourselves from a society, from friends, and from anyone else with whom we are not living in this pandemic. So the visual and verbal communication is highly impacted in this type, and this is actually taking a toll on our mental health as well. The next important line which we read through in under this topic is, to stay in touch we cannot touch. The very reason that we need to stay in touch with our friends in times where there is pandemic, where there is some sort of emergency situation where you cannot go outside, is because we have to understand that human beings are social animals. So if we tend to exclude ourselves from a particular group or society, we won't be convinced to readily interact with them until and unless the people from other side take a step. We seldom realize that this exclusion will harm us more in the long run, since a self-immersed man would much less likely be a responsible man in future, would much less likely be a man who is a source of inspiration, who is a source of uh, motivation to people around him, or much directly and much straightforward. He or she will be a person who will be much less liked in comparison to other people in a room or in a public or official setting. So in that scenario, we have to stay in touch as a dutiful person, so that people keep interacting the way they used to do when hard times did not come. The third prompt, and the most important of all prompts, is the identity and work from home. So first of all, we need to register this fact that we have multiple identities. We have a private identity, we have a working identity. In better words, we can say we have a professional identity, we have a private identity. The very reason that people suggest to keep our professional and personal life different and distinct is because we know for a fact that the way we treat our colleagues is much different from the way we treat our families. Our priorities shift a lot when we are taking our families into consideration versus we are taking our jobs into consideration. After registering this fact, when we see that there is decline in the emphasis on soft skills, there is rise in digital skills like social media, marketing, video editing, etc. So this, what does this represent? This represents that the social media identity of a person is being valued much more than the social identity of a person. That means that the person is much more valued in a work from home system on a parameter that is solely based upon his social interactions on social media versus a person who prefers to be much more humane and social in real life. So that is a dubious stance which is actually gaining trend in the world of pandemic, in the world where we had to work from home. We have observed that the personal and the official boundaries have dissolved. That is, we have looked around ourselves and when people attend a Zoom meeting, let's say, they often eat their lunch at the same time while attending those Zoom meetings. For example, working mothers who actually attend a meeting side by side, work for their children and look after their children so that they are not creating any mischief at home. So the personal and professional boundaries have dissolved. And since we are constantly pursued by the same kind of disturbance, that is personal plus professional disturbance 24 by 7, and there is no variety in life, we tend to be more frustrated over time. And the exact amount of work feels more and more burdensome as time passes. One different aspect to this whole problem is the tangible memory. Understand the fact that the tangible memory revolves around built spaces, affecting your interaction with these spaces as well. When you move around in a space or in a locality, you explore the situation to the fullest. And when you explore it, you create memories, you create flashbacks in your mind, which helps you to recall things much faster. For example, when you visit back to your old school, when you touch the benches, do you remember that this is the exact bench where I scratched my name? This is the exact seat where I used to sit and enjoy with my friends and learn in the school. So just by touching that particular furniture, you were able to recall so much memories. And think about all the memory losses and all the potential good memories which could have been created had pandemic not been there and we were allowed to move in our society and interact with people. But since it is not being done, we are losing touch with a part of ourselves, a part which has shaped us over time. And this is known as topophilia, decrease of topophilia. Let's say we love to roam around in a park. Let's say we used to move around the lake, enjoy the scenery, or interact with people. Where we had a particular type of fondness related to particular space, we are not able to go there. So this is a lack of topophilia. So this not only like results us being a more disinterested person, it actually devoid us of our holistic development because these places are built keeping in mind a specific reason that people not only interact with these spaces for the function that they serve, like offices, schools, etc. They do interact with these spaces for the motive of their self-development, about experience, about their lifestyle. The next important factor here to consider is about the social capital loss. That is, when you interact with people, you have a certain sort of validation you get from them. You have a certain sort of support system which you get from them. And these support systems are the ones which actually help you propel up the ladder of success in life. So when you do not work with people in a close setting, what you really are is a person who is no different from a bot, working at home, pursued by responsibilities of home and responsibilities of offices, and there's no new support system for you, which makes you mentally unfit at times. You are nagging, you're complaining about your existing work style, or at times you might just have thoughts of giving it up, giving up your job so that you could gain respite just for the small change. So this loss of social capital is also pretty significant in case of online semester. So that's it for the course. I hope I was able to summarize it with sufficient depth. Thank you for being such patient listeners.